This is 8 Minutes, a podcast helping you understand the energy and climate challenge in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Paul Schuster. Back in October, California passed a really important bill. Officially titled Senate Bill 253, the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act. It's often shortened and simplified to just SB 253. And what SB 253 does is, for the first time, require large companies operating in California to report on the greenhouse gas emissions that their companies are creating. It's creating transparency and consistency so that stakeholders can understand the real impact of a company's operations on climate. That bill was spearheaded by a nonprofit in California called Carbon Accountable, who took the bill to State Senator Scott Wiener and worked with the senator to successfully get this first-of-a-kind legislation across the finish line. I'm joined by the co-founder of Carbon Accountable and one of the chief architects of SB 253, Catherine Atkin, to unpack the new legislation over the next few minutes. 8 minutes. It's how long it takes the sun's rays to hit Earth, or about 7 minutes longer than my kids will spend on the phone with their grandparents during the holidays. It's not just my kids, right? Let's get it on.
SB 253 just says, look, let's all start comparing apples to apples. Let's all disclose according to the leading global standard in the same way so that we can start making sense of where we are and where we need to go.
Senate Bill 253, the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act. California's new law changes the landscape on corporate climate reporting. For the first time, large companies doing business in California and over $1 billion in revenue will be required to disclose just how much greenhouse gas emissions they create. Catherine Atkin is one of the chief architects of SB 253 and talks to the reasons behind this important legislation.
The fact of the matter is that we just didn't have the GHG data we needed to be smart about making decisions about climate action and where to put resources to decarbonize, and that we really needed mandatory reporting by corporations in order to give ourselves and those corporations the data they needed to move down the road more quickly.
Now, corporate carbon disclosure isn't necessarily new. Some large companies have been voluntarily reporting their emissions for years. But what SB 253 does is it takes the accounting out of the voluntary realm and makes it compulsory. If you want to do business in California, you'll have to comply.
Voluntary emissions reporting had its time, right? We needed to figure out how to do it. I mean, how does GHG accounting work? How do corporations incorporate that, as you said, into their internal processes? How do we use these standards and also develop technologies to support the deployment and both the accounting and the reporting? And so, that happened, and it was an important decade or two process. But we have now gotten to the point where we sort of gotten to the limit of the efficacy of voluntary reporting because we now needed to use it for a much more comprehensive effort to decarbonize.
This is a big deal. California is basically saying that companies are going to need to start treating their environmental data like they do their financial data. Here in the US, companies all follow the same financial accounting principles, the same public financial disclosure regulations. And what SB 253 does is say that greenhouse gas data is just as important as the financial data is to investors, employees, consumers, in helping them make decisions regarding their dollars.
Carbon emissions are like, financial data. Exactly. It is core data to a company. And it's part of their future sustainability is how they're managing their climate risk. And it has to be, and the impacts that they're having on climate have to be built into their business model.
And while California may be out ahead in terms of requiring this type of disclosure, other regulatory bodies are already trying to figure out how to make environmental reporting a part of a company's public record. The International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, released their rules on climate reporting earlier this year, requiring companies to look at the risks and opportunities of climate change. And the U.S.'s Security Exchange Commission, the SEC, is poised to release rules in the new year regarding all public companies and their requirements to report on greenhouse gas emissions. But the SEC process has been fraught with challenges, as some companies have pushed back on the perceived burden of these new requirements. In the SEC's case, there's concern as to whether that agency even has the standing to require this disclosure in the first place. Catherine explains that SB 253, at least, sits on stronger ground.
when it comes to California, the beauty of SB 253 is it's a law that's been passed by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, right? So there is no agency deciding if it can impose a requirement from a disclosure. This is a California law.
Part of the reason Catherine and California legislators believe that SB 253 will weather any legal battles also lies in its construct. At its heart, SB 253 is a disclosure requirement.
The fact that this doesn't require a change in business practice, it only requires a disclosure of data, is a really important distinction. Both in terms of kind of like where we are in the trajectory of this this kind of work to decarbonize corporate America, but also because of the potential for legal challenges for something that would be a regulation.
As Catherine indicates, it's an important distinction that SB 253 simply requires transparency into greenhouse gas emissions, but doesn't actually require reductions. Of course, the hope is that once you measure it, it becomes easier to do something about it. And as Catherine indicates, California sees that as an economic opportunity as much as a climate one.
The climate economy is absolutely, where sustainable business development happens, where those trillions of dollars get unlocked.
SB 253 has the potential to really change the landscape on how companies report on and react to their greenhouse gas emissions. And it's going to have a trickle-down effect, as even the emissions embedded within a company's supply chain are going to have to be tracked and measured. So smaller companies and medium-sized businesses, they're going to find themselves reporting on carbon to their commercial customers. Catherine has been working on this legislation for over 3 years, shepherding it through the legislative process, sponsorship by State Senator Wiener, and eventually to Governor Newsom's desk and signature into law. It's been a journey for her, but one where the result could be transformative.
There's lots of ways for us to kind of go out of our comfort zone, see a gap, and try to do something about it. And so I hope that this story also gives people that sense that they too can make a difference, and that if you kind of decide to put down your marker and work on it, it might take a little while, and you might have to make some new friends, but that there's an opportunity to be part of the solution.
I'm Paul Schuster, and this has been your 8 Minutes.